Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're plunging into, well, a really dark and baffling chapter in American history. It's all centered on these unsolved crimes that absolutely terrorized a major city, New Orleans, just over a century ago.
We're talking about the hunt for the figure known as the Axman of New Orleans.
Exactly. And we've got a stack of sources here. Articles, contemporary accounts detailing the brutal attacks, the wild theories flying around.
And the intense search for this killer, who was mainly active between 1918 and 1919, a search that ultimately didn't find him.
Right. So our mission here is to dive into all this material, pull out the crucial details, give you a clear picture of this chilling historical mystery. It's almost surreal in parts.
Think of it as your shortcut to understanding not just what happened, but maybe why it still captivates us, why it's so unsettling even today.
Okay, let's dig in.
So the Axeman, active in New Orleans and nearby areas primarily between May 1918 and October 1919.
Now, I know some older reports mention similar attacks going back to maybe 1911.
Yeah, they did, but more recent researchers actually question if those earlier incidents were really connected. The pattern isn't quite the same.
Okay, so for this deep dive, we're really focusing on that Maine 1918-1919 period.
That's the core of it. And the way he operated, his MO, was incredibly distinctive. Almost a terrifying signature.
The attacks almost always involved an axe, right?
Almost always. And here's a chilling detail. He often used the victim's own axe. One found right there on their property.
Wow, that immediately tells you something, doesn't it? About his method, maybe his audacity.
It does. And the entry was usually pretty consistent, too, across many cases. He'd typically remove a panel on a back door.
How? Like pry it off?
The sources say he'd use a chisel, and then he'd just leave the chisel and the removed panel right there near the door.
Okay, so gets inside, then what?
Then he'd attack one or more people in the house, usually with that axe, but sometimes a straight razor was used instead, or maybe in combination.
And the motive. This is the part that always gets me.
Yeah, that was, and still is, the baffling part. The sources are really clear. These were not robberies.
Nothing was ever stolen, even if there was money or jewelry.
Exactly. Valuables often left in plain sight, completely untouched, which, really stumped investigators at the time.
And there's another critical detail, one that really shaped the early theories. The victims.
Yes. The vast majority were Italian immigrants or Italian Americans.
Okay, so that immediately makes you think, right? Ethnic targeting.
Absolutely. And the media at the time jumped all over that. Lots of sensational headlines, suggestions of ethnic motives.
Was there talk of, mafia involvement?
There was speculation, yeah. But the sources we have consistently point out there was just a complete lack of actual evidence connecting these attacks to any kind of organized crime. It was mostly just talk.
So, if not ethnic, what other theories were floating around? People must have been desperate to make sense of it.
They were. Another idea that came up, looking back, is a possible sexual motivation. Well, some analysts propose the killer might have been a sexual sadist, maybe primarily targeting female victims, and only killing men if they got in the way.
Is there evidence for that?
It's a theory based on patterns. There's at least one case mentioned where the woman was killed, but the man in the house was left unharmed. Some saw that as supporting the idea.
But it doesn't fit every single attack.
No, definitely not. It's just one lens people tried to use, and then there's the really bizarre one.
The one that sort of gives the Axeman his unique, almost folkloric status.
Exactly. The less plausible, maybe, but absolutely fascinating theory related to jazz music.
Right, okay. This brings us to the infamous Axeman letter.
Yeah, this was something else. It was sent to newspapers, published on March 13th, 1919, and it claimed to be from the Axeman himself.
And reading parts of this letter,
Yeah.
it's just wild. What does it say?
He claims to be, and I quote, invisible even as the ether that surrounds your earth. Says he's not human, but a spirit and a demon from the hottest hell.
So totally leaning into this supernatural terror thing.
Completely. He boasts about never being caught, calls the police utterly stupid, says they amuse him, and his satanic majesty.
It's this mix of, chilling threat and almost theatrical arrogance.
It really is. But then the letter takes this just unbelievable turn. He offers a proposition, as he calls it.
A proposition from a supposed demon killer.
Yeah. He announces he's going to pass over New Orleans at 12:15 earthly time on next Tuesday night. That was March 19th. And he swears, by all the devils in the nether regions, that every person shall be spared in whose home a jazz band is in full swing at that exact time.
Wait, seriously? Play jazz or I'll kill you.
Pretty much. He explicitly says, I am very fond of jazz music, and the threat is clear. Those who do not jazz it out will get the axe.
That is just deeply weird, like something out of a very dark fairy tale.
It really is. So what happened on the night of March 19th, 1919? Did people actually do it?
Oh, they absolutely did. The sources describe the city going wild with jazz. Dance halls were packed.
And people hired bands for their homes.
Hundreds of homes, especially in those Italian neighborhoods where the attacks had happened. Professional musicians, amateur musicians, anyone who could play jazz was apparently booked that night.
An entire city playing jazz to ward off a killer? That's incredible.
Yeah.
And the result?
No murders occurred that night.
Wow.
Yeah. It just adds this layer of dark absurdity onto the real terror people were feeling.
Definitely cements his place in legend, doesn't it?
For sure. So, okay, with that bizarre interlude in mind, let's walk through some of the key attacks. See how this pattern emerged and sometimes how it shifted.
Sounds good. Where does the documented series begin?
May 23, 1918. The victims were Joseph and Catherine Maggio, an Italian grocer and his wife attacked in their apartment above their shop while they slept.
And this was brutal from the start.
Incredibly brutal. Their throats were cut with a straight razor. Catherine's injury was so severe she was nearly decapitated. Then they were also struck with an axe.
Why both? Any theories on that?
The source suggests the axe blows might have been an attempt to obscure the throat cutting, maybe make the cause of death less clear initially. Joseph actually survived for a short time, but died after his brothers found them.
Just horrific. Was there anything else found at the scene?
Yeah, adding to the mystery, there was a message scrawled in chalk on the pavement nearby. It said, Mrs. Maggio will sit up tonight just like Mrs. Tony.
Mrs. Tony.
Investigators believed it referenced an earlier, possibly related attack on another Italian couple, the Ciambras, back in 1912. So maybe a link to earlier crimes after all, or the killer wanting people to think so.
Any other clues inside?
Police found the killer's bloody clothes inside the apartment, suggest he changed before leaving. But crucially, and fitting the pattern we discussed, money and valuables were untouched.
Okay. And the weapon, did they find the razor or the axe?
They found a blood-stained straight razor later on a neighbor's lawn, and it belonged to Joseph's brother, Andrew.
Oh, wow.
So he immediately becomes a suspect.
Absolutely. Andrew owned a barbershop, lived right next door. He claimed he was drunk that night and didn't hear the forced entry, though he did report hearing groaning sounds later.
But they let him go.
Yeah, they couldn't find enough evidence to hold him. But it shows how, right from the start, the investigation was difficult, grasping at straws almost.
Okay, so that's the first one. What's next?
June 27, 1918. Louis B. Sumer and his mistress, Harriet Lowe, attacked in their private quarters behind Basumer's grocery store.
Simply method.
Similar brutality. Basumer was struck with a hatchet, fractured his skull. Lowe suffered a really severe head injury, left one side of her face paralyzed. They were found critically injured the next morning by a bakery driver.
And the axe, or hatchet, was it theirs?
Yes, the sources note the axe belonged to Basumer himself. Consistent again.
And robbery.
Ruled out. Nothing stolen.
This case got messy, didn't it, with Harriet Lowe?
Yeah, it really highlights the chaos and speculation these attacks caused. There was a huge media frenzy around Harriet Lowe, partly because of her relationship with Basumer, which was illicit at the time.
And she made accusations.
Wildly conflicting statements.
Yeah.
At one point, she accused Basumer of being a German spy because some letters were found. Then, literally on her deathbed, she named Basumer as her attacker.
So Basumer gets arrested based on that.
Twice. He was charged with her murder after she eventually died from her injuries. He actually served 9 months in prison.
Wow. But he was acquitted.
Yes, the jury acquitted him in just 10 minutes. Meanwhile, another man, Louis Ubacan, an African-American man who worked for Basumer, was also arrested early on.
Why him?
Partly based on a discounted statement from Lowe about a mulatto attacker, but there was no real evidence against him either, and he was released. It just shows the panic, how quickly accusations flew.
Lives ruined in the crossfire.
Yeah.
Moving into August 1918.
August 5th, the attack on Anna Schneider. She was 28, 8 months pregnant.
Oh no, what happened?
She woke up in the night to a dark figure standing over her. She was brutally attacked, bashed repeatedly in the face, her scalp cut open.
Did she survive?
Miraculously, yes. Her husband found her when he got home late from work. And even more miraculously, she gave birth to a healthy baby girl just 2 days later.
That's unbelievable. Was this the standard Axman MO, though?
This one's interesting because it deviates a bit. The windows and doors apparently weren't forced open. Authorities thought she was probably attacked with a lamp found nearby, not necessarily an axe.
And the robbery motive?
Here's another deviation. About $6 or $7 were stolen from her husband's wallet. It's a small amount, but it breaks that pattern of nothing being taken.
So maybe not the Axman. Or maybe he was changing tactics.
Exactly the questions they were asking. An ex-convict named James Gleason was arrested, but later released. Despite the differences, investigators did publicly link this attack to the Maggio and Basumerlo cases. They seemed to think it was the same guy, or maybe a copycat.
And then just days later, another attack.
Just 5 days. August 10th, 1918. Joseph Romano, an elderly man. He lived in a room adjoining his nieces, Pauline and Mary Bruno.
What happened there?
The nieces heard a commotion, went to check on their uncle, found him with a serious head injury, and they actually saw the attacker fleeing the house.
They saw him. Did they get a description?
They did. Described him as dark-skinned, heavy-set, wearing a dark suit and a slouched hat. Romano died 2 days later.
Okay. Ransacked house, but nothing stolen. Axe. Backdoor panel.
Exactly. Home ransacked, but nothing taken. Bloody axe found in the backyard. And yes, a panel on the back door had been chiseled away. Chillingly consistent.
This must have sent panic levels through the roof.
Oh, absolutely. Another attack so soon, fitting the pattern so clearly. This is when the city really started to feel besieged.
And this is when that retired detective started talking.
Right. John D'Antonio. He became quite vocal, publicly speculating that this was the same killer from those possible 1911 attacks. He described the killer as having a sort of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde personality. Someone who killed without any obvious motive, brutally, but could blend back into society, seemed like a normal person day to day. It really highlights how baffling that lack of motive was, even to experienced police.
Okay, so panic is high. Then we jump forward several months. Just before the Jazz letter appears, March 1919.
March 10th, 1919. The attack moves slightly outside the city to Gretna, a suburb. The Cordemelia family, Charles, his wife Rosie, and their infant daughter Mary, all Italian immigrants.
Attacked in their home.
Yes. Their grocer, a man named Orlando Giordano, heard screams, ran over, and found just a horrific scene. Charles and Rosie had severe skull fractures.
And the baby.
Tragically, little Mary was killed right there in her mother's arms, a single blow to the back of her neck.
Unbelievable cruelty. Was the MO consistent here?
It was. An axe found on the back porch, a panel on the back door chiseled away, nothing stolen. Classic Axman signs.
But this case had another awful twist, didn't it? Involving the grocer who found them.
A truly horrifying one. Rosie Cordemelia, after she regained consciousness, falsely accused Orlando Giordano and his teenage son, Frank.
Why would she do that?
The sources suggest it might have been out of jealousy or some kind of personal spite between the families. We don't know for sure.
Did people believe her?
Even though her husband Charles denied her claims, yes. The Giordanos were arrested. And based solely on Rosie's testimony, they were found guilty.
What were the sentences?
Frank, the son, was sentenced to hang. Orlando, the father, got life in prison. Charles Cordemelia actually divorced Rosie after the trial.
That's devastating. Did the truth ever come out?
Thankfully, yes, but it took almost a year. Rosie finally confessed that she had lied. The Giordanos were eventually released.
Just terrible. A miscarriage of justice fueled by the Axeman's terror.
It really shows the corrosive effect that fear was having on the whole community.
Okay, so that's just before the Jazz letter. Did the attack stop after that bizarre night of forced jazz playing?
Not entirely, no. The letter was March 19th. Fast forward to August 10th, 1919. A grocer named Steve Boca.
Another grocer. Attacked how?
In his bedroom while sleeping. An axe-wielding intruder. Boca woke up to see a dark figure, was struck, somehow managed to regain consciousness and ran out into the street, found his head had been cracked open.
Did he survive?
Yes, he collapsed at a neighbor's house but survived. Couldn't remember details about the attacker, though.
And the MO. Backdoor panel, nothing taken.
Yep. Panel chiseled out, nothing stolen. Back to the classic pattern, happening months after the Jasmine letter.
Okay, and then another one soon after.
September 3, 1919. Sarah Lawman, a 19-year-old woman living alone, attacked in her apartment.
How was she found?
Neighbors found her unconscious, severe head injury, some teeth knocked out.
This one seems a bit different again.
It does show some variation, yeah. Which again raises those questions. Was it the same person changing things up? Or a copycat?
What was different?
The intruder apparently got in through an open window, not the typical chiseled backdoor panel, and she seems to have been attacked with a blunt object, though a bloody axe was found on the front lawn.
So the axe was there, but maybe not the primary weapon. Strange.
Very strange. She survived, but like Boca, had no memory of the attack itself.
And then the last known victim.
October 27, 1919. Mike Pepitone.
What happened to him?
His wife was woken by a noise. She saw a large axe-wielding man fleeing from her husband's bedroom. Pepitone had been struck in the head, was covered in blood.
A witness, finally. Could she describe him?
Only vaguely. She said he was large, but couldn't give much more detail. The scene was apparently gruesome blood spatter all over the room, even hitting a painting of the Virgin Mary.
And after the Pepitone attack, nothing.
Nothing. The Axman, whoever he was, seemingly just vanished. The spree stopped as suddenly and mysteriously as it began.
Which leaves us with the biggest question. Who was he? Was he ever identified?
Never caught, never definitively identified, and that enduring mystery has led to, well, a lot of speculation over the decades.
I bet. Any prominent theories or suspects we should talk about?
Absolutely. Probably the most widely repeated suspect, thanks largely to crime writer Colin Wilson, writing much later, was a man named Joseph Monfrey. Or maybe Mumfrey, the spelling varies.
Okay, Joseph Monfrey. What was Wilson's theory?
Wilson speculated that Monfrey was the Axeman and that he was shot and killed in Los Angeles in 1921. And get this, supposedly killed by the widow of Mike Pepitone, the Axeman's last victim.
Wow, that's dramatic. Like revenge. It wraps things up neatly.
It does wrap things up neatly, maybe too neatly, because here's the crucial part. Another true crime writer, Michael Newton, decided to actually check the story out.
What did he find?
He did extensive searches, public records, police records, court records, newspaper archives, both in New Orleans and Los Angeles, and he found nothing.
Nothing. No record of a Joseph Monfrey being killed in L.A.
Zero evidence. No record of Mrs. Pepitone being arrested, tried, or convicted for any such crime, or even any record of her being in California at all.
So the whole Monfrey story is likely what?
Newton's research strongly suggests it's basically an urban legend. A story that grew over time to provide an answer where there wasn't one. There's no more actual evidence for it now than there was back then.
But was there anyone named Momfrey or Momfrey around?
Well, the sources mention Momfrey was a surname in New Orleans. There might have been a Joseph Momfrey or Mumfrey who had a criminal history, maybe linked to organized crime. And interestingly, a Momfrey was a suspect in that 1912 Chiambra case, the one referenced in the chalk message at the Maggio scene.
But, okay, so a possible connection.
Possible, but very tenuous. The records are just too thin to confirm anything. And remember, the Chiambras were shot, which is a different MO than the Axeman's usual axe attacks. So the Monfrey theory, especially Wilson's version, it seems pretty shaky.
Any other serious suspects?
Scholar Richard Warner proposed another candidate, perhaps the most researched one, Frank Doc Mumfrey. He lived for 1875 to 1921 and apparently used the alias Leon Joseph Monfrey or Manfrey, maybe where some confusion came from.
Great Doc Mumfrey, what's the connection there?
This is where it gets really interesting, possibly linking back to that jazz motive. Warner noted Mumfrey ran a jazz business in the Garden District that was struggling. And supposedly, his business suddenly did unusually well right after the city was basically forced to hire jazz bands everywhere because of the Axeman's letter.
Whoa! That's quite a coincidence if it's true. A potential motive, however bizarre.
It's a compelling angle, definitely adds another layer to the jazz letter mystery, but again, it's a theory, not proven fact.
And then, of course, we had all those people accused or arrested during the actual investigation.
Right, like the poor Giordano's, Orlando, and Frank, falsely convicted in the Cordemelia case. Andrew Maggio, the brother whose razor was found.
Louis Bessumer, accused by Harriet Lowe. His employee, Louis Ubicon. James Gleason in the Schneider case.
Exactly. A lot of names floated, a lot of suspicion cast, but ultimately none of them stuck. The trail just went cold.
So, bottom line, despite the terror, the media frenzy, the investigations, the bizarre twist like the jazz letter, the killer was never found.
Never definitively identified. And the crimes stopped just as mysteriously as they began after that Pepitone attack in October 1919.
The mystery just endures, doesn't it? Fueled by that unique brutal pattern, the lack of clear motive, the intense fear, those awful false accusations.
And that incredibly strange detail of the jazz letter. It all combines to create this enduring puzzle.
So this has been our deep dive curated for you into these fascinating, really unsettling sources. We've covered the chilling timeline, the killer's distinct methods, the dead ends, the competing theories.
What does it all mean? Well, this story leaves us with so many questions that honestly are unlikely to ever be answered definitively.
Was it really just one person behind all of it? Maybe evolving his methods or taking breaks?
Or some of the later attacks, the ones that deviated slightly, perhaps copycats jumping on the bandwagon of fear.
Or was it something else entirely we haven't even considered?
And that jazz letter, it just adds this layer of dark, almost theatrical absurdity to the very real terror. The idea that a killer demands jazz and the whole city complies. It's astounding.
He literally enforced the playing of jazz, became this almost mythical bogeyman figure, and then just, poof,
Yeah.
vanished from the historical record.
Which raises, I think, a really interesting final thought for you listening. What is it about certain unsolved cases, especially ones with these bizarre, unique elements, like the Axeman's signature or his strange demands? What allows them to transcend just being crime stories?
How do they become these enduring, almost supernatural figures in our collective imagination, like the Axeman did? Something to think about.